When we read Chinese history, we encounter many great cities that have come and gone over the centuries. But perhaps the fortunes of none was more dramatic than that of Xi'an in northwestern China. Many Chinese dynasties, including the Zhou, Qin, Han, Sui, and Tang dynasties, built their capitals there. For much of this period, it was also known by another name, Chang'an. But despite all of its ancient glory, over the past 1,000 years, the city has retained only a fraction of its former significance. I was originally planning to discuss the geography and history of Xi'an and the surrounding regions in one video, but with how much history has taken place around here, the video was pushing 1 hour long, and I was still leaving out important information just to make the cut. For this reason, I split the story of this region into 2 videos. This video covers the earlier history of the region during the Zhou Dynasty, and especially under the state of Qin, which went on to conquer its eastern rivals to unify China. The second video covers the history of the city from after the fall of the Qin Dynasty to the present day, and especially during its golden ages as the capitals of the Han and Tang dynasties. Xi'an is located in the center of the Wei River Valley, at the point where the Jing River flows into the Wei River. Downstream from Xi'an, the Wei River feeds into the Yellow River. To the north of the Wei River Valley, the Yellow River is poorly navigable as it flows from north to south for hundreds of kilometers through vast expanses of valleys and gorges until it reaches the waterfall at Hukou, after which the terrain suddenly opens up for the Yellow River to flow slowly past the alluvial plains of the Fen River to its east and the Wei River to its west. Some of the earliest political entities in Chinese history were established in this region. The lower Wei River Valley became known as Hexi, literally west of the Yellow River, whereas the lower Fen River Valley became known as Hedong, east of the Yellow River. After passing through the border between Hexi and Hedong, the Yellow River flows head-on into the Qin Mountains, at which point it is forced eastward through another series of valleys and gorges, past a northern branch of the Qin Mountains known as the Xiao Mountains, until it finally reaches the open terrain of the North China Plain. The middle reaches of the Yellow River passes through the Loess Plateau, named after a thick, soft soil called Loess. In ancient times, the Loess Plateau was covered with forests and grasslands, but since then, habitat destruction has caused much of the landscape to become barren, leading to massive erosion that gives the waters of the Yellow River its characteristic color. But even without deforestation, the soft Loess still erodes easily, and over countless millennia this has led to the formation of dramatic landscapes, including Loess tablelands, areas flat at the top with steep erosion gullies on its sides, like the mesas in the southwestern US. Over 3,000 years ago, a people known as the Zhou migrated from deeper in northwestern China through the Long Mountains, modern-day Liupan Mountains, into the Wei River Valley, eventually establishing their capital at Fenghao, a predecessor of Xi'an. Fenghao was a twin city made up of 2 parts, Fengjing and Haojing, and was located at perhaps the most perfect site in the Wei River Valley. It was in the geographical center of the valley next to the confluence of the Jing and Wei Rivers, giving it easy access to the rest of the valley in all directions. It was also well protected by the Wei River to its north and the Qin Mountains to its south. Not far to the east is a spur of the Qin Mountains, known as Mount Li, that provided the city with a last line of defense against invaders attacking from the east. Around this time, northern China was dominated by the Shang Dynasty, which had been ruling from the North China Plain since around 1600 BC. The Zhou people were initially vassals of the Shang Dynasty, but around 1045 BC they led a rebellion with other tribes against the Shang, conquering it. Afterwards, the Zhou established many vassal feudal states to colonize and assimilate the newly conquered territories, although the core Zhou territories remained in the Wei River Valley. The farms in the Wei River Valley provided the Zhou dynasty with a steady grain supply. The mountains surrounding the Wei River Valley also provided the Zhou kings with a secure military base to project their powers onto the newly conquered eastern territories. The main road linking the Wei River Valley to the North China Plain traverses hundreds of kilometers of rugged terrain along the Xiao Mountains. In ancient times, the path of the road was obstructed by a tableland sandwiched between the Yellow River and the Xiao Mountains. The sides of the tableland were steep, and the top of the tableland was covered in thick forests. And so instead of passing over the tableland, the ancient road was forced to follow the course of a gully 7 kilometers long through the tableland. This route was so narrow that at certain points only one chariot could pass through at a time. Many ancient travelers experienced a feeling of extreme claustrophobia as they passed through the gully, as if they were trapped inside a box. The Chinese word for a box is Han, and for a valley is Gu, and so this gully became known as the Hangu. To the east of the Hangu, the ancient road bifurcated into northern and southern branches that converge in the valley of the Luo River, another tributary of the Yellow River. Here, the rulers of the Zhou Dynasty built a secondary capital city to serve as its forward eastern base. The city, named Luoyi, or alternatively Chengzhou, would become Luoyang, the other great ancient Chinese capital city that would someday rival Chang'an. The region around Luoyang and the plains to its east were traditionally known as the Central Plains because of their central location on the ancient Chinese geopolitical map. Although the Yellow River flows parallel to this road, this stretch of the river also flows through the gorges at Sanmenxia, which were extremely treacherous for ancient sailors to sail through. It was also possible to travel from the Wei River Valley to Hedong, and then from Hedong through the Taihang Mountains to the Central Plains, but this route was also much more circular. As a result of all these factors, this road along the Xi'an Mountains that we have just outlined, and especially the segment passing through the Hangu, became the most significant bottleneck between the Wei River Valley and the Central Plains during the early centuries of Chinese history. Immediately to the east of the Hangu was a small region named Shan. In later centuries, a county was established here named Shan County. Still much later, the province to the west of Shan County, centered around the Wei River Valley, was named west of Shan, or in Chinese, Shanxi. Shanxi remains the name of the province to this day, and the extra A in the romanization of its name is to distinguish it from neighboring Shanxi province. The tones are different, but without the extra A, the romanization would be identical. A number of folk songs from the Zhou Dynasty were eventually included for selection in an ancient text known as the Book of Odes. One of these folk songs mentions the Jing and Wei Rivers, that the waters of one of them is clear while the other is filled with sediment. And at the confluence of the two rivers, a distinct meeting of the waters takes place, like the one we see today along the Amazon River near Manaus. This eventually evolved into a well-known Chinese idiom, 涇渭分明, literally, the waters of the Jing and Wei rivers are distinct, meaning a distinct separation between two things, such as right from wrong. But for a natural phenomenon that should be as obvious as a meeting of waters, the ancient records have been very conflicting about which river is clear and which is murky. And the general understanding now is that it can simply fluctuate depending on a variety of factors like the time of year, the presence of upriver flooding, and the relative amounts of upriver deforestation during the ancient time periods in question. As much as the mountains surrounding Fenghao provided the Zhou kings with a secure base to protect their power, its proximity to the frontier also put it constantly at risk of attacks from hostile tribes. In 771 BC, Fenghao was sacked by barbarians and abandoned, and subsequent Zhou kings were forced to move their capital to Chengzhou. Because of the changing capitals, the earlier version of the Zhou Dynasty with its capital at Fenghao became known as the Western Zhou Dynasty, whereas the later version became known as the Eastern Zhou Dynasty. During the 5 centuries of Eastern Zhou Dynasty rule, the Zhou kings lost almost all of their authority over the feudal states, which began competing with one another for influence. The first half of this period became known as the Spring and Autumn period, whereas the second half, which lasted until 221 BC, became known as the Warring States period, during which 7 major states fought against one another to control China. During the Spring and Autumn period, a previously insignificant people known as the Qin gradually filled the power vacuum left behind by the Western Zhou Dynasty. They, like the Zhou, had also migrated eastward into the Wei River Valley, but with the best lands in the valley already under Zhou control, they had to make do with the marginal lands in its western outskirts, grazing their flocks on the pastures there and providing the kings of the Western Zhou Dynasty with horses. They served the Zhou king loyally during the fall of the Western Zhou Dynasty, and for this, their ruler was ennobled as a count, making Qin officially a vassal of the Zhou Dynasty. Over the ensuing generations, the nascent state of Qin fought off neighboring barbarian tribes to become a regional power. It began to expand into the wealthier eastern half of the Wei River Valley, and increasingly set its eyes onto the even greater riches of the Central Plains. The growth of Qin brought it into increasing contact with the state of Jin, located across the Yellow River in Hedong. The two states at first enjoyed good relations with one another and formed a marriage alliance, such that the phrase 秦晋之好, or literally a marriage between Qin and Jin, became an idiom to describe a marriage alliance between two families. But tensions mounted between the two states as their interests collided with one another, especially since the calm stretch of the Yellow River between Hexi and Hedong meant that they could attack each other relatively easily. They also had competing interests in the Central Plains, especially against Zheng, a small but filthy rich state located at a key commercial hub. In 627 BC, Qin launched a long-distance expedition against Zheng with an army 30,000 strong, a massive force for the time. The expedition was a poor idea from the start, since even if the Qin army were to somehow survive the treacherous journey through the Xiao mountains to conquer Zheng, it was still too far away for Qin to hold on to anyway. Lo and behold, the Qin army was detected on its eastward march, and realizing that further operations were useless, it went home. But as it was again passing through the Xiao mountains, it was ambushed by the Jin army, which had snuck across the Yellow River unnoticed. The entire Qin expeditionary force was annihilated. The Battle of Xiao illustrates two key principles about the Wei River Valley that will play out again and again throughout Chinese history. The first principle is that while the road through the Xiao Mountains was the most direct route connecting the Wei River Valley to the Central Plains, it was still an uncomfortably difficult route. The second principle is that despite being well protected by mountains, the Wei River Valley still has a major soft underbelly along the Yellow River. A strong faction based out of Hedong, such as Jin, could easily cross the Yellow River to attack the widest, flattest section of the Wei River Valley, or, barring that, cut off access to the road along the Xiao Mountains. To borrow a phrase from the British, Hedong is a dagger pointed at the heart of the Wei River Valley. After the Battle of Xiao, Jin soon grew to become the dominant superpower in China for most of the ensuing 200 years, frequently intervening in affairs in the Central Plains while preventing Qin from expanding further east. Many generations of Qin rulers had to give up their dream of expanding into the Central Plains and instead made do with fighting the smaller tribes along its northwestern frontier. By the second half of the 400s BC, during the early Warring States period, Jin was partitioned by its three most powerful noble houses into the states of Han, Zhao, and Wei. Initially, Wei was the most powerful of the three successor states, and it continued the Jin policy of denying Qin access to the lands further east. It expanded into Hexi, bringing it into direct conflict with Qin. The frontier of Qin and Wei settled along the Luo River, with both sides building fortifications, including primitive versions of the Great Wall, against one another. Qin was initially much weaker than Wei, but during the mid-300s BC, the ruler of Qin appointed a minister named Shang to reform its system of government, replacing the power of the nobility with that of a much more efficient centralized bureaucracy, in the process converting Qin into a highly militarized state in which one's career was directly tied to his military achievements. In 350 BC, a new capital city at Xianyang was also established on the north bank of the Wei River. Under Shangyang's leadership, Qin began to inflict defeat after defeat against Wei, eventually conquering all of Hexi. From there, Qin continued to press eastward against both Wei and Han, and by 300 BC had occupied key positions in the Xiao Mountains as well as bridgeheads in Hedong. With its natural borders finally secure, Qin began to establish fortifications at easily defensible positions. The most famous of these was Hangu Pass, or in Chinese, Hangu Guan, built at the eastern entrance of the Hangu to completely block traffic into and out of the valley. To the south of Hangu Pass was a pass through the Qin Mountains known as Wu Pass. The road through Wu Pass generally followed the valley of the Dan River, a tributary of the Han River, which in turn flows southeastward into the Yangtze River. And so unlike Hangu Pass, which faced directly eastward into the Central Plains towards the central states of Wei and Han, Wu Pass faced southeastward into the Yangtze River basin towards the southern state of Chu. The stretch of the Qin Mountains immediately west of Wu Pass is extremely rugged, punctuated only by very narrow valleys. This continues on until a wider valley finally emerges in the mountains, through which the main road connecting the Wei River Valley to the Han River Valley and then the Sichuan Basin in the mountainous southwest passes through. Fortifications for another mountain pass, San Pass, was established here. In addition to the main road through San Pass, a number of smaller trails were also established through the more rugged sections of the Qin Mountains. The routes followed by these trails were so steep that along many sections wooden paths known as 栈道 had to be installed on the sides of cliffs for travelers to walk on. Of these routes, two of the most significant were Ziwu Road, whose entrance is directly south of Xianyang, and Baoxie Road. Although these routes served as shortcuts connecting the valleys of the Wei and Han rivers to one another, they remained secondary to the main mountain road through San Pass. To the north of San Pass, the upper stretches of the Wei River flows through terrain so rugged that it remained poorly accessible until modern bridges and railroad tunnels were built there in the early 20th century. Instead, the ancient roads traveled much further north, through gaps in the Long Mountains, further into the northwest. It was through these gaps that the Zhou and Qin peoples first migrated into the Wei River Valley. Another set of fortifications, known as Xiao Pass, were built here. And here we have it, the four main mountain passes surrounding the Wei River Valley: Hangu, Wu, San, and Xiao. Because of them, the Wei River Valley took on a new name that will remain in use to the present day: Guanzhong, the land inside the passes. Beside these four mountain passes, Guanzhong was also connected to Hedong via three main ferries along the Yellow River. Militarily, by far the most important of these three ferries was the central ferry at Pujin, which gives invading armies from Hedong direct access to the flattest, widest part of the Wei River Valley. And for this reason, the west bank of Pujin Ferry also became heavily fortified by Qin. At various times throughout ancient and medieval Chinese history, a pontoon bridge also crossed the Yellow River at Pujin Ferry. Compared to Pujin Ferry, the northernmost Longmen Ferry has the advantage of crossing at a much narrower stretch of the Yellow River, but then it faces relatively enclosed terrain directly to its west. The southernmost Fengling Ferry faces even more enclosed terrain along the foothills of the Xiao Mountains. From its home base in Guanzhong, Qin also expanded southward into the mountainous Sichuan Basin. Although this region was remote and inhabited by indigenous peoples, it still had abundant natural resources that Qin could draw on for its war efforts, not to mention advantageous upriver geography along the Han and Yangtze rivers that it could utilize against the downriver state of Chu. By 300 BC, the occupation of the entirety of Guanzhong, the conquest of the Sichuan Basin, the further subjugation of tribes to the northwest, and the control of both the Xiao Mountains as well as the ferries along the Yellow River finally gave Qin both the geostrategic position and the economic might to become the dominant power in China. An ancient geopolitical concept that became prominent during this time period is that of Shanxi, meaning west of the mountains, and Shandong, meaning east of the mountains. In modern times, Shanxi and Shandong are provinces named after their positions relative to the Taihang Mountains, but 2,300 years ago, the mountains refer not to the Taihang Mountains, but rather the Xiao Mountains. In this sense, Shanxi is synonymous with Qin, especially its core territories in Guanzhong, whereas Shandong is synonymous with the remaining eastern states. The terms Shanxi and Shandong emphasize the great physical distance that separated Qin from the other states, the military threat that Qin posed to them, as well as the political importance of Guanzhong in relation to the rest of China. The terms Shanxi and Shandong would only stop referring to the Xiao Mountains until after the fall of the Tang Dynasty around 900 AD, when Guanzhong stopped serving as the political center of China. Also in regards to Shandong and Shanxi, There is an ancient Chinese quote from the Han Dynasty a few hundred years later, 山东出相，山西出将. Literally, Shandong produces ministers, Shanxi produces generals. Nowadays, this phrase is often misattributed to the modern provinces of Shandong and Shanxi, especially since Shandong is the home province of many famous scholars, including the philosophers Confucius and Mencius, as well as the minister Zhuge Liang, whereas Shanxi has produced a long list of famous generals, including none other than Guan Yu himself. But all of this is just a coincidence. The original meaning of the phrase was simply in reference to the physical and cultural divide between East and West centered around the Xiao Mountains. That no matter how wealthy or culturally developed the eastern regions were, the western region still consistently had a strong military culture that allowed it to exert its influence onto the east. To counter the eastward expansion of Qin, the states of Shandong repeatedly formed alliances with one another to march onto Hangu Pass, but were usually forced to withdraw due to the intimidating fortifications there. Their repeated failures gave Hangu Pass the near-legendary reputation of being impenetrable. To be fair, Hangu Pass was not impenetrable, but the geography of the region made it the ultimate force multiplier. A small defending force at Hangu Pass did not need much food supply to survive, whereas the much larger attacking army needed to transport its grain supplies across long distances through difficult mountain roads. Because of this, assaulting Hangu Pass was as much a test of political will as it was a military might, and the eastern states were too divided among themselves to collaborate effectively to contain Qin. Meanwhile, Qin made the most of its advantageous geography to pick the perfect opportunities to attack the eastern states. Throughout the first half of the 200s BC, the Qin army launched many expeditions, eastward out of Hangu Pass into the central plains against Han and Wei, southeastward out of Wu Pass and down the Yangtze River against Chu, and northeastward out of Hedong against Han, Wei, and Zhao. As Qin won victory after victory, the rulers of the Shandong states tried every trick they could think of to stall its inevitable advance. The king of Han sent an engineer named Zheng Guo to convince the Qin leadership to build a costly irrigation canal connecting the Jing and Luo rivers, hoping to bankrupt Qin on an infrastructure project of this unprecedented scale. The plot was foiled midway through the construction of the canal, and the king of Qin was so furious that he wanted Zheng Guo executed. But Zheng Guo convinced him otherwise, arguing that, yes, he did start out with devious intentions, but as the project was ongoing, he began to realize just how much a finished canal would benefit Qin. Constructing the canal may delay Qin's advance by several years, but afterwards, the increased food production from irrigation will allow Qin to grow even more powerful. The king of Qin agreed. The finished canal, named the Zheng Guo Canal, converted large areas of surrounding farmland into some of the richest in China. With all the advantages it had accumulated over the preceding century, Qin finally conquered the 6 eastern states in a rapid series of military expeditions throughout the decade of the 220s BC. In 221 BC, the king of Qin declared himself the first emperor of China, establishing the Qin Dynasty. From his capital at Xianyang, he tried to forge a centralized state to rule over the peoples he conquered, many of whom had drastically different languages, cultures, and writing systems. He also launched more major infrastructure projects, including connecting the existing border walls to build the Great Wall, massive palaces near Xianyang, and a lavish mausoleum of which only a small corner, which includes the Terracotta Army, has been excavated thus far. Qin dynasty rule was highly unpopular with the conquered peoples, and after the death of the first emperor in 210 BC, massive rebellions broke out across the territories of the former Shandong states. In 207 BC, Xiang Yu, a leading rebel general, approached Hangu Pass from the east. But before he could break through the pass, another rebel general named Liu Bang attacked through the much less intimidating Wu Pass to capture Xianyang, ending the Qin dynasty. Liu Bang tried his best to maintain peaceful rule in Guanzhong, but in 206 BC, Xiang Yu arrived at Xianyang with his army, sacked the city, and burned it to the ground. Over the next few years, Liu Bang, based out of Guanzhong and Shanxi, and Xiang Yu, based out of the eastern territories, fought a series of wars against one another known as the Chu-Han contention, which in many ways paralleled the Qin conquest of the eastern states just 2 decades prior. The geostrategic advantage of Guanzhong again played an important role in the war, allowing Liu Bang to defeat Xiang Yu by 202 BC. Liu Bang declared himself emperor, establishing the Han Dynasty. With Xianyang in ruins, Liu Bang was forced to build a new capital city south of the Wei River at a previously obscure district named Chang'an. Over the next few centuries, the Han Dynasty capital at Chang'an would develop into one of the most splendid cities in Chinese history, although all of this, and more, will be for part 2.